bureaucracies actually do? Well, they implement Congress's policies. It's, if Congress can pass a law saying it wants the government to do this or that, but Congress doesn't implement anything. All they do is pass laws. It's the bureaucracy that implements those laws. Remember, the executive branch executes the laws of Congress. So let's look at implementation. This is translating the goals and objectives of a policy into an operating ongoing program. This includes creating and assigning an agency the policy. You have to create the agency to administer the policy. And then translating what is probably a fairly vague prescription from Congress into specific rules, regulations, and forms. Imagine Social Security. It's one thing to pass a law saying that we are going to collect money in taxes and Social Security, from people's paychecks, and then pay out a check to the people above the age of 65 or now 67 every month. It's something entirely different to actually put together the massive federal bureaucracy that is in charge of both collecting, holding on to, and then returning that money to people upon retirement. A bureaucracy coordinates resources to achieve these goals. It handles the critical stage of policymaking between the establishment of a policy and the consequences of that policy. How does that policy look in the real world? It doesn't always work. Sometimes programs are designed poorly. Sometimes the law Congress has passed is ambiguous or imprecise or possibly impossible. And sometimes laws conflict with each other. You got one law saying do this and another law saying do that, and it's impossible to do both. Sometimes, of course, there's lack of resources. If the federal government doesn't, Congress doesn't like an agency that's already existing, they might just cut its budget. Republicans, when they get control of Congress, or even when they get control of the White House, kind of famously defund the Environmental Protection Agency, which they see as getting in the way of business, which is a little bit ironic because the Environmental Protection Agency was signed into law by Republican Richard Nixon. But these days, Republicans see it as a scourge in business, and so they just don't fund it. And without money and staffing to carry out the policy goals, they can't do their jobs. Many different types of resources are needed: personnel, training, supplies, equipment. Sometimes they lack the authority to act. Some of our regulatory agencies have become voluntary, meaning that they go around and they monitor what a company is doing, but there is no enforcement, there is no punishment if you don't do it. So they can go around and they go, you need to be better about this, and the company can go, yeah, I'm not going to do that, and nothing happens to them. For example, our food inspection agency, or the agency that's in charge of making sure that our food is being produced in a clean and safe way, has been severely limited in its authority and how it can punish people who aren't following our health codes. And in fact, a lot of that reporting is now self-reporting. So companies inspect themselves and tell the government, everything's fine, we're doing okay. We're also doing this with things like offshore oil wells, which it was a big story when the British Petroleum well blew up in the Gulf of Mexico. Bureaucracies have to have standard operating procedures. They have to have a uniform approach to no matter how complex the problem. It would not be fair if every time somebody came to the bureaucracy to deal with it, they dealt with each case in its own individual way. It has to be fair. This is how we do it. And sometimes that's maddening, and sometimes it's frustrating, and sometimes, quite frankly, it doesn't make sense. But bureaucracies, in order to be effective, have to have a uniform approach to everybody who walks through their door. And those routines can be difficult to change, even when it becomes clear that they don't make sense and they need to be changed. That inertia of routine is very difficult. The disposition of the administrator, I mentioned that over the broad scope of time, because the secretaries don't stay very long, they don't necessarily have a huge impact on the bureaucracy itself. It tends to be the day-to-day office workers that do. But the administrator disposition does have some impact on this. Their personalities, what they choose to highlight, what they choose to downplay, who they choose to give power to in the bureaucracy and who they don't, does shape the bureaucracy. But ultimately, for most interactions with the bureaucracy, it's that person sitting at the counter that you're dealing with. The policies of the Social Security Administration may be one thing, but how easy that person who you're on the phone with to work with, that's something entirely different. The tighter the standard operating procedures are, the less discretion there is. the less it's up to an individual person to decide how to handle the issue. Where there are not standard operating procedures or where they are vague, that's when we get more discretion. Some policies are spread among several agencies, and some agencies have different rules for the same policy. So if you go to this agency, you get one answer. You go to that agency, you get another answer. This is, again, a problem of lawmaking where we often have confusing and contradictory laws. Here are departments and agencies who all have some responsibility for border security. So you see that big list there? Every single one has played some role in our border security. So you can see that if you're somebody who maybe had some issue with border security, whether it was harmless, you were just trying to figure out how to get somebody into the country for Christmas or something, or you had a bad intent, you were trying to sneak something in that we didn't want here. You could try to find holes in any one of these and slip through that way, and hopefully not deal with the better run bureaucracies. So let's look at the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This is generally considered a success. It had a clear, concise goal, which was to register more minorities in the South and ensure that they were actually allowed to vote. The implementation was clear, and those carrying out the law had obvious authority and vigor to do so. The people actually implementing this did so with great passion because these were people who were fighting the civil rights fight of the 60s. And they also used federal marshals to intervene when the local governments or our private citizens tried to prevent minorities from voting, so it had plenty of authority. And so we generally consider this to be a successful implementation at the level of bureaucracy.